Hello boys and girls, my name is Mrs. McClung, and today we're going to be looking at Chapter 9, Lesson 13, Subtract with Renaming. So first we're going to start with our vocabulary, and a whole number is a number without any parts, any decimals or fractions after it, such as 1 whole, 2 wholes, 3 wholes, and so on. Next we have our numerator, and our numerator is the number that it is out of total. So if you're talking about 5/8, for example, you're talking about 5 parts out of 8. A denominator is the number in the bottom of a fraction, and this is the number it is out of total. So we have 8 total here, and we have 5/8 shaded, as you can see. So the 8, the denominator, is what it is out of. A mixed number is a number with a whole and a fraction. So this is an example of 1 2/3. Simplest form is when you put a fraction in the simplest form. That means you have the equivalent fraction of 2/3 is 8/12, and you just took 8/12 and you divided both the numerator and the denominator by 4 to give you 2/3. So 8/12 is an equivalent fraction of 2/3, and we like to put our fractions in simplest form because it is easier to see that in our mind. So we always want to make things in simplest form with fractions. Our next vocabulary word we're going to be looking at is the word rename. When we rename our fraction, it's like we're regrouping or we're borrowing from our wholes. So here we have 4 2/8, and we will rename it to 3 10/8. And an instance you would need to rename a fraction is when you need to regroup or borrow from our numerator. When you don't have enough in the numerator, you will rename it. The next vocabulary word we're looking at is an improper fraction, and that is when you have a larger number in the numerator than in the denominator. So 5/2 is an improper fraction. Equivalent fractions is just the same thing. You're saying 8/14 is equivalent to 4/7. It's the same amount, but they have a different number in the numerator than in the denominator. But they're equivalent. They're the same amount. Now that we've gone over vocabulary, I want to give you an example of what an equivalent fraction is. So here we have our mixed number of 2.5. And we'll model 2.5. And the equivalent fraction of 2.5 would be 2 4/8. And here you can see 2 4/8. 1/8, 2/8, 3/8, 4/8. So you know it's the same because if you put it right on top of each other, you won't have any difference. They are equivalent. They're the exact same amount. Even though it looks like a different number, they are actually the same amount. So that's why it is an equivalent fraction. So today we're working out of our math book. We are on, like I said, Chapter 9, Lesson 13. So please go to page 689 in your math book and follow along. And if any time I go too fast, you can pause and resume when you are ready. First, we're going to look at example 1. So a black sea cucumber has an average length of 2 feet. A spotted sea cucumber has an average length of 1 1/3 feet. How much longer is the average black sea cucumber than the average spotted sea cucumber? So it's asking you to find 2 minus 1 1/3. First, we're going to estimate, and we estimate because that is what good mathematicians do. We always estimate first to make sure that when we solve, we're close to our estimate. So 2 will stay the same, and 1 1/3, well, 1 whole is close to 1/3, and that's something you can do in your head very easily. 2 minus 1 is 1. Now we're going to go ahead and use our fraction tiles to represent 2 minus 1 1/3. So here we have 2 minus 1 1/3. And you can see how it's represented with our fraction tiles. So right away you can see you can't take away this 1/3 piece from this 1. You can't just break it off. So what we'll do is we will rename one of our wholes, and we're going to use the same denominator as the one we have over here, 1/3. So we want to take this and figure out how many thirds we need to make one whole. And here you see 3/3 is equivalent to 1 whole. So I can rename this 2, cross it out, and now it is 1 3/3 minus 1 1/3. Now I can easily take away a third, take away a whole, and I have 2/3 left. And the way you would do that with the standard algorithm is you take away the 1 whole, 1 minus 1 is 0, 3/3 minus 1/3 is 2/3. And that is what we got here. Let's look at example 2 now. Turn the page, we have example 2. And it shows find 4 1/4 minus 2 5/8. First, we want to write the equivalent fraction. And the least common denominator is 8. 4 and 8, their LCD is 8. So what do we need to do to get our 1/4 to turn into an 8 in our denominator? What times 4 will give us 8? 2. And if we're going to multiply our denominator by 2, we need to multiply our numerator by 2 because 2 over 2 is equivalent to 1 whole. So 1/4 times 2 over 2 is going to give us 2 over 8. So now we have 4 2/8 minus 2 5/8. Since you cannot subtract 5/8 from 2/8, we're going to rename 2/8 to show that we have more 8s. And we can do that because we have a whole here. We can take away from that. So this 4 2/8, what we're going to do is we're going to cross out that 4. And that 4 now becomes a 3. And then the 2/8, what are we going to do with that whole we just took away? We're going to add in 8 8s. So now we have 8 plus 2 is 10, and then our denominator just stays the same. So we renamed 4 2/8 as 3 10/8. That's an equivalent fraction. And we had to do that so we now have something we can subtract from our 5. We have enough in our numerator. So first you subtract the wholes, and 3 minus 2 is 1. 10 minus 5 is 5. And then our denominators will stay the same. So 4 1/4 minus 2 5/8 is 1 5/8. Well, hopefully that was very easy to follow, and please remember to go back and watch if you need any additional assistance. Thank you.